and, in conjunction with treatment and assessments. Hey guys, welcome to another video. My name is Tiffany. I'm a school psychology intern, and today we're going to be talking about 5 school psychology myths that I either come by on the internet or just talking to family and friends. Before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe down below and hit the notification bell. It'll really help me out and you get notified when I post a video. The first myth we're going to be talking about is that we diagnose kids. So for the most part, we do not diagnose students. We do a lot of assessment, but that is for the eligibility process because we put them into different eligibility categories for special education, which means we'll do all the assessments and synthesize all the information, gather all the data to put them into categories that'll provide services if they qualify. And so they could qualify for a learning disability or ADHD, which is under other health impairments. They could qualify for autism or an intellectual disability. And so while we're qualifying them or putting them into categories, we don't necessarily diagnose them with a medical condition. Typically, they're medical doctors or psychologists with a PhD that can diagnose kids or people, and of course psychiatrists, they diagnose and then prescribe medication. In certain states, if school psychologists with a specialist degree, master's plus certification or an EDS, in some states you're allowed to have a private practice and you may be able to practice within your scope of competence. If you're allowed in your state, you can have a private practice, do assessments, and maybe diagnose them. And so that really depends on what degree you have and what state you work in. So I would definitely look into that. And if you're more interested in clinically diagnosing people or children, then I might choose a different field because that is not what we technically do. Myth number 2 is that we don't work with children. And I hear that so many times because people end up spending a lot of time in meetings or writing reports, doing a lot of work behind the scenes. And I just want to say, like, while that may be true that you are doing a lot of report writing and you're not meeting with a lot of students, you still get to work with children. And I think if you make it your priority or your goal to meet with children and work with them, you can definitely make it happen. This role, I feel like it's very flexible. Of course, like you do have like requirements to your job. Like if there's a special education eligibility coming up, there's deadlines and laws that require you to do certain things, but outside of that, it really depends on what you're interested in. If you want to have group counseling as an intervention for students in the school, as like a tier 2, you can totally do that. Push for it in your school, work with your counselors. This also depends on what level you're working with. Especially in middle school and high school, you're going to have a lot less assessments, which means you're going to be able to do more prevention services, do more group counseling and intervention. And you can even be a mentor. Maybe you launch a mentoring program in your school and you're a mentor for a student. So there's a plethora of ways you can work with children in the schools. I think some school psychologists with a really high caseload and a ton of report writing might say this, but I just want to say it's not true. And like Charles always says, Charles Barrett, I'll leave his interview right here if you want to check it out. He says it's always about the children. He makes it his goal and his priority to at least interact with at least one child a day. And so I think it's a myth. You do work with children, and if you want to spend more time with them and support them face to face, you can definitely make it work. On the flip side, I've also heard that as a school psychologist, you don't really work with adults, you work with children, which I guess if you're looking at the client, that's true. We're there to support children, but we're actually there to support children and teachers. And we are in so many meetings, and I think we work with a lot of adults, and you're going to have those skills, like the interpersonal skills to build relationships with all the adults in your building. Yeah, you work with a lot of adults, you work with a lot of kids, you're working in a big system, which is a school. And so just interpersonal skills are so important, and that is a big myth. You will work with a lot of people. So the 4th myth is that your main role is testing for special education eligibility, and that is so false. Especially in the more recent training programs, we are taught to do so many things, and even in our first semester at least in my program, we talked about the different roles and functions of a school psychologist in the school building. And it is not just assessments and special education. Of course, like, we do have to know how to do that because no one else in the building is really certified to do that or trained to do that. So that is one of our roles, but we also do so many things. Ideally, we should be supporting the school in a lot of different ways. And this includes, doing interventions, either academic or behavioral, helping the school with school-wide prevention and threat assessment. And overall, you're a mental health professional. You're like a clinician in the building, and they should use you in that capacity and not just for testing, because I feel like there's way more to our role than that. And we've studied mental health and psychopathy and different interventions and consultations. So that is a huge myth. And I think there are some schools and districts that view us as testing machines, but let them know that you are capable of doing so many other things. Okay, and the fifth myth I have for you is that we are a brand new profession. And while that's like sort of true, it's like not true. Let me give you a quick history lesson. I think in the grand scheme of things, it is kind of new, but I wouldn't say it's brand spanking new. It's been around for like over 50 years. So starting in the 1900s, there was a lot of social reform, and in the beginning of the 1900s, special education begins in the country. So schools are providing some sort of special education services, and the first training program for school psychology kind of pops up around World War I. Wow. And that was at NYU. That's where I went. I'm so proud. So in the 1930s, APA was created, and that's kind of for all of psychology and for psychologists who have a PhD or a PsyD, and they kind of excluded school psychology because they didn't really see it as a legit field. However, in 1945, Division 16 of APA was created specifically for school psychology. So we're making progress, but I feel like even though they included us in APA, it wasn't really perceived as a real field, or like, it was kind of like wishy-washy. So in 1969, NASP was created to kind of strengthen the identity of school psychology. I mean, since then, like the 1970s, until now, it's been kind of booming, and it's kind of due to the creation of NASP, along with laws that were passed in Congress that required schools to support all these different students. It's called Public Law 94-142. After this law, I mean, the field has changed entirely. So starting in the 1970s, the number of school psychologists in the country started to double and triple in the next like 5-10 years, which is crazy. And so I would say if you were in school in like the 1980s and after, you probably had a school psychologist in your school. In 1970, there were only 17 states with state associations. By 1989, 48 states had state associations. I mean, that tells you how much this field kind of like blew up in the span of 10-20 years. And so I guess it is relatively new. These days, all schools should have a school psychologist, at least in the US. And I think a lot of people think this because they've never heard of school psychology or school psychologists. And that's why they think this is brand new. And whenever people introduce school psychologists, everyone thinks they're guidance counselors. And that's a problem. So let's go and spread some awareness. I guess starting in the 2000s, school psychologists started focusing more on interventions compared to treatment. So I think that's why the MTSS and RTI process kind of blew up more recently. And they are really pushing that in our grad school programs and courses because they realize, I guess through research and just from experience, that it is more effective. We can help and support more students in conjunction with treatments and assessments. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video about the 5 myths about school psychology. I'm sure there's a lot more, especially because it's a new field-ish. Let me know if you've heard of these myths or if you agree or disagree down in the comments below. Maybe you think it's true and maybe we just have differences in opinion. So I would love to hear about it in the comments below, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!